All right, so welcome. Thanks for being here. My name is Lainey Rowell, and I am an evolving learner, and I'll explain more about what I mean by that in just a bit. But I really just wanted to give you a little bit of background on my experience. I've been an educator for more than 23 years. I face-to-face naturally, but also about 15 years ago, I got really involved in online learning, blended learning. I was on the committee that wrote the National Standards for Quality Online Teaching in 2019. And honestly, not a lot of people were paying attention to it because online learning pre-COVID was a pretty niche-y thing, but now we're all in it, whether we wanted to be or not. And so I really love online learning. I think there's a lot of really amazing things that can happen. And so I just want to share some of the ways that we can build online community that inspires, empowers, and engages. I am going to take a moment and drop my slides into our chat. And please, please, please feel free to reach out if there's anything I can help with. But those are all my slides with all my contact information. I like to say I come with a lifetime guarantee. So don't hesitate to reach out. I'm going to go ahead and, like I said, evolving learner, lifetime guarantee. So I am going to do this session today about building learning community, or about building community with our learners and also our peers and the world. And then tomorrow I'm doing another session on really how to motivate through innovative practices. So today more about setting the stage and building community. And then tomorrow I'm going to get into really practical ways that we can have learning that is innovative and is going to honestly also build community. That's a really big deal to me, and in online learning, that's a must. So first off, thank you for being here. Thank you for being in education still. It's a hard thing right now, but you're all still here and willing to learn and move forward. And so I appreciate you. If no one has thanked you yet today, I want to thank you. So in our virtual meeting etiquette, I always start meetings with setting the stage for this is how we're going to do this. And these are my general meeting etiquette things. And so I definitely say that these are all important, but there are some times where I want to actually emphasize, and I think this is a good part of building community, is making sure we're all on the same page. And so today, I would love it if you had your video feature on, but I'm not going to demand it. I would love it if you did, though. I'd love it if you muted your ringers, stayed really engaged. Like I said, I'm going to ask some questions that I would love for you to use the chat for. And then if you want to, raise your hand or anything else, as much as we can be engaged with each other, that's what I would really, really love. And so if you haven't had a chance, I will be checking in on that chat. If you haven't had a chance, I know we have a really short time, but I will catch up if it doesn't happen live. I will catch up on the chat transcript, but I'd really love to know who you are if you want to take a moment and put that in there. And by the way, this idea of, let's talk about what the expectations are for today. This was inspired by a walkthrough that I did in a classroom where I saw the teacher say, okay, well, so here's what's going to happen today. Today is a camera's off day. You do not need your camera on, so feel free to turn that off. And I really loved that. So not only revisiting those co-created norms, but also saying, well, here's what we can do today because of just what we have planned. So I love that. So I am going to start with some 5-2-5 breathing. I always start all of my sessions, whether it's with adults or kids. I like to start with an SEL practice. I like one that's more inclusive, that's going to kind of do something to unify us and bring us together. And so for this morning, I chose 5-2-5 breathing. And so some of you might be familiar with this. I'm going to go ahead and do this really quickly. Well, not too quickly, but I'm going to go ahead and do this, and I would love it if you joined with me. So I'm going to breathe in deeply for 5 seconds, hold it for 2, and then breathe out deeply for 5 seconds. And I'm going to be asking some questions, and so throughout, and so if that awkward teacher wait time starts to really bother you, feel free to do your 5-2-5 breathing then. So here we go. I'm going to breathe in deeply for 5, and then hold 2, and let go for 5. And then repeat as necessary. So I'm really curious, and this is a great time for us to start chatting with each other. And we're a small enough group, if you can unmute, feel free to unmute. But do you have any inclusion activities that you use at the beginning of your meeting? Either keep doing your 5-2-5 breathing, or you can type, it's up to you. Okay, so feel free to add these or not add these, and I'm going to keep going, and feel free to keep doing that. So, evolving learner, what does that mean? So, in March, we released a book called Evolving Learner with my co authors, Christy Andre and Lauren Steinman. And as we wrote this book, we realized, and by the way, we didn't set out because we had all the answers. We actually wanted answers. You know, how do we as educators be our best self? How do we help kids? And the three things that emerged through this is that we need continuous improvement through cycles of inquiry. We need social emotional learning for all. And, you know, my mom is a retired flight attendant. And so I think about her safety speech, you know, put the mask on yourself before you assist a child. And I think that's really important to think about right now. And then willing to learn from kids, peers in the world. So all of that really important. So those are some of the lenses I'm going to be looking through as I share what we in online learning have learned works really well about building community. Now, we have to also acknowledge that we're not working with a group that chose to go into online learning as previously, but I still find that these practices are the best. And I think if you heard the students talking earlier, a lot of them, it got really quiet when, well, why would you want to come to school? And then eventually it evolved into, well, I want to feel connected. I want to see my teachers. I want to see my peers. And so I think that speaks to the fact that building this community is so critical. So this is a question I often ask teachers, and that is, who is working the hardest in your classroom? And so I've noticed that the answer could change pre-COVID, post-COVID, or I should say in COVID. So pre-COVID, I would get the vast majority of teachers saying, well, I work the hardest, but it wasn't unanimous. And now that we're in this distance learning where we're all figuring this out in real time, a lot of teachers feel like they're working super hard and that they're pushing a lot of stuff out. And if you heard from our kids, they feel like they're working really hard because a lot's being pushed on them. So we want to really think about how can we shift this from being really teacher driven to more learner driven. And so, you know, on the left, which this is an image inspired by Austin Kleon, on the left, we've got this teacher driven, one person in the front. And then we've got the learner driven over on the right, which you can't even tell who the teacher is because they're all teachers and they're all learners. And so that's what we really want to have happen here. And so I'm constantly thinking about ownership of learning. And so even in our session today, right now, we have a very short amount of time and it's going to be more teacher driven than I would like. But that sometimes has to happen because we haven't established a relationship yet. We haven't built our community yet. And that's not something that's going to happen in 40 minutes. And so we have to be thinking about, okay, well, where should I be right now? Is there an opportunity to be more learner driven? Because that's what I want to do as much as I possibly can. And so not that we don't ever do direct instruction, not that we don't ever do the teacher driven, but, you know, as I was listening to the students on the session prior, I kept hearing a theme of they want to have more voice. They don't want to feel like assignments are just pushed on them and that they're just expected to be in front of a camera. They want to have some choice. They want to be heard. And so I think that's really important. And then I think about our teachers and how they must be feeling. And if you think about professional development, and I prefer the terms professional learning, we want the same thing, right? There's a stat, and we have it in the book, 18% of teachers get a choice in their professional learning. And that's really unfortunate. And so we need all learners to be involved, and we want this to be learner driven. It doesn't matter, kids, adults, we want this to be learner driven. So in the book, we talk about how we can do this, where we cultivate an inquiry-driven culture of ownership and empowerment. I'm going to have some questions coming up, so I hope you all have your chat ready, and you can just send it to me or you can send it to each other. It's totally up to you. But, you know, how do we engage as peers to learn from each other? And so this is to do with really professional learning, but I'm going to also be talking throughout this session about ways that we build communities with our students, with our families, with everyone. So this is just a graphic that I'm sharing with you because we do need to, and I'll talk more about this, we do need to, you know, define the school-wide focus. And focus has become a really important word for me right now, as well as kind of a triggering word, because we're so in this crisis still that we're having a really hard time focusing. And so it feels like we're putting out a lot of fires. It feels like we're kind of just trying to solve all these different problems. And so we really need to pick our focus. And so I think that's the initiating of the collective cycle of inquiry. And then we get our PLCs, and then we get our coaching, and we make sure that social emotional learning is a part of all of that. So in online learning, I just wanted to share this with you. In online learning, we have what is called community of inquiry. And this is really important because this talks about all the elements that we always think about in online learning. So we're always thinking about, first of all, social presence. And someone put in the chat, I want to go back so I can say who it was. And if you don't ever want me saying your name, please don't, please don't. So I hope I'm going to say it right, Kara. And if it's Cara, yeah, I think I got it. She actually said it phonetically in the chat. So if you weren't here when she posted that in the chat, she's saying she wants to know more about the peer collaboration. And that is so important. And we call that social presence. And so we need to have this community and these interpersonal relationships. And then also honoring our individual personalities as well. And then teacher presence. And I would sum this up almost in one word of relentless. As the teacher, it is my job to be relentless and letting people know that I'm there. Traditionally in online learning, which that sounds a little bit like an oxymoron, but traditionally in online learning, we have to be really relentless because we don't have them physically with us. So we have to be sending the emails. We have to be following up with text messages and phone calls, and we have to be relentless, not from a place of you owe me this assignment, but from a place of I'm here for you and I want to support you. And then cognitive presence. And so we're all in this sustained communication to learn together, and we're all bringing our gifts and our knowledge and our experiences. So this is a word that I share with educators all the time. It's one of my favorite words, pre-COVID and still in COVID, and that is equifinality. And there is no right or wrong way to do what we're doing right now, but there are good things to do. There are best practices that we know about, but there's no recipe. There's just good ingredients. And so high quality ingredients is going to lead to some really amazing things, but we don't have a recipe. So I want to release people of the feeling that there's only one way to do this. So, or another way to say it, like my friend, Dr. Katie Novak says, firm goals, flexible means. So I am going to take a pause, and I find the awkward teacher wait time is like 4 times longer in a Zoom than it is in person because I don't have that power of proximity. I don't get to navigate around the room and make you feel uncomfortable faster. So what I would love for you to do is, what is your goal for community building? Or again, a nod to my friend Katie, it would be cool if, like, what is your it would be cool if? And I'm going to take a moment to pause, and I would really love for you to share it in the chat. What is your it would be cool if? Yeah. Thank you for sharing that, Ron. I know that connection. And I heard it with the students this morning. That's kind of what's driving them, is they want to see their teachers, they want to see their peers. And then how can we really make that happen? I agree, Wendy. I have this in my mind that we're still so in this that we can't really kind of calibrate to where we are right now. And I think that in 2 years, 3 years, 5 years, we'll look back and we'll go, wow, we were trying to do a lot when maybe, good for us for being so resilient and trying so hard, but maybe we really should have taken a beat and focused more on each other and taking care. And so thank you. Please keep those responses coming. I love it. I am going to share with you back in, I think it was the spring, I don't remember the exact publication date, but I was featured in an article for eSchool News, along with some quotes from my podcast co-host. We do a podcast called Lemonade Learning. So the book came out in March. That was not planned, obviously. And then Brianna Hodges and I started a podcast in March because we were trying to figure this all out, and we thought other people might be trying to figure it out with us. And so we came up with 5 ways to build a community of online learners. So I'm going to share this from the perspective of both with students, but also with staff and with your peers. And so The first one is engage all stakeholders in norm setting. And this is a really big one. And by the way, it's never too late for these. You might feel like we're already in the school year, we can't do this, but it's okay to reset. It is okay to reset. In fact, I encourage you to reset as often as you need to. But we want to set those priorities. If we need to revisit those priorities, that's one thing. But as much as we can focus, we want to focus. Then we're going to co-create shared expectations. And this happens with everyone. This happens as a staff. This happens with families. This happens with our learners. And we want to focus on these individual connections as much as the peer-to-peer connections. And so again, today I'm going to be talking mostly about setting the stage, building community, and then tomorrow it's really more about the innovative practices to have learning experiences that are truly going to motivate our learners. So co-creating shared expectations, this is something I do every session with learners. As my friend Bree would say, tall and small, it doesn't matter. This is what I do with all of them. What are our shared expectations? And so it's super basic, and it's linked in here, but it's super basic. You just click on it and I just start, and I'll tell people, I'll tell my learners, again, big or tall, big or small, just type in the chat if there's an expectation that you think we need to do, and or raise your hand if we're in a group that we can unmute and just share out loud. That would be great too. So this isn't a one and done. This is something that we start and then we revisit. And so we'll come back to it more often in the beginning. And then if things drop off and it's starting to be like people are not being as actively engaged in the synchronous or even in the asynchronous experience, then we need to come back and talk about these. But I find that when learners, and then again, adults or children, when they're involved in co-creating these shared expectations, not only are they more likely to abide by those expectations, but they're actually more likely to help you enforce them. And so it becomes an ownership thing. And so that's really important. Oh, sorry about that. And so that just took me to the actual make a copy of this. Not that it's a very glamorous doc, but there you go. All right, so I would love it. I'm just gonna throw some, I'm not gonna wait a real long time on all of these, but if you wanna drop in, how have you set or reset the expectations with your team? I would love to hear about that. Yeah, I hear you, Stephanie. Let's talk about some of those things. So if you have some things you wanna share with the group as far as how you've set or reset, and feel free. Oh, I love that. Remind them of them often, right? I hear that, needing a reset. So I'm going to go on to the next tip, but please feel free. And I think if you guys are able to unmute, feel free to unmute as well. I think we're small enough we can do that. So another way that we can build community is use get to know you activities. And so we don't have these moments of passing each other in the hall. And even if we are a hybrid and we do have some in-person experiences, the physical distancing is really limiting some of the authentic conversations that we would normally have to get to know each other. And so again, I know we're headed into Thanksgiving and it might feel like, well, we've kind of missed the boat on this, but no, this year is the year of permission to fail forward, permission to reset, lots of permission this year. And so I really encourage us to kind of think about, okay, well, what could I do? And so, when I heard the students and I've heard some of you say, like, I wish we could, be getting to know each other the way that we did in the online. I will say that in my 15 years of online learning, what I have learned is there's actually potential to get to know each other better in the online space. Because, for example, I don't know if any of you experience this in your classroom time, but as a teacher, I would say, does anyone have a thought about, and I would ask for a response, and I would get the same 3 to 4 kids. Didn't matter what year, didn't matter what grade I taught. I would always get the same 3 to 4 kids raising their hands. And I don't think it's because I only had 3 to 4 smart kids in the class, not even close. I think it's because I usually had, on average, only so many kids that were comfortable speaking out loud. And so that's really what the struggle was. So I am going to keep going on that. And this is another thing I'm thinking about with our teachers and how frustrating it must be for them to not get to know each other. And it might feel very isolating to them. So how can we interact peer-to-peer? And so I love that this was one of the questions. Hold on one second. I love that this was one of the questions that someone asked, how can we make this peer-to-peer? And so my recommendation would be discussion boards, chats, and breakout rooms. And so you're probably doing at least one or more of these, but I think it's important to really think about, for example, a lot of times I'll say to an administrator, well, your teachers are using Google Classroom, that's really great. Do you have a Google Classroom for your staff? And there's a lot of times like, oh, I never really thought of that. That's actually a really good idea. And so giving a space for people to share their thinking, I think that's really important. So it doesn't have to just be discussion boards, chats, breakout rooms. There's tons of different things. It's not about the tools, it's about the relationships the tools enable. But having those collaborative spaces are really, really important. And so we want to have these opportunities and structures also for peer feedback. And I'm going to talk more about that in regards to staff, but also for students. And so I think there's a ton of ways we can do that. I'll get into some of the more specific ways that we can do peer feedback tomorrow. But I do, and I love that this has been a theme. A lot of you have talked about social emotional learning, and I do think we have to develop our own SEL capacity to better equip so we are in a collaborative environment where we trust each other. We've got this mutual respect and honesty. So I want to take another pause here. How are you prioritizing teacher and student well-being? That's really helpful, Ron. It sounded like they were very, the kids on the call this morning were very stressed. And I feel like what you say in the chat is exactly what they're asking for. Flexibility. Please, please be patient with us. Let us have some grace, because we have a lot, and they're getting a lot from all sides. I love that. It is really important for teachers and for yourselves. So I hope you're all doing things to take care of yourself as well. And it can be mindfulness, it can be some of the breathing practices like we did at the beginning, but we all have to do our very best to take care of ourselves so that we can take care of others. All right, so tip number 3, provide frequent opportunities for discussion. So I've tried to model that in here by having a chat question, a prompt. Even though we're a very short session, I'm prioritizing that because hearing from you is super important to me. I love that, Wendy. And so Wendy, when you start that with your staff, that's a hint to them that they could be doing that with their students if they're not already. And so I love that modeling. I think that's really, really important. And so what are some ways that we can provide frequent opportunities for discussions? So I like to be very intentional on when do we want synchronous discussions versus asynchronous discussions. So I'll go back to my point earlier about, I don't think I just have 3 to 4 smart kids in the class. I think I have 3 to 4 kids that are comfortable raising their hand and speaking on the fly. And so I'm trying to honor those students who thrive in that in the moment conversation, and there's a lot of value in that, but also an asynchronous discussion, and you can even use a tool like Flipgrid, where they have time to process their thinking and to think more deeply with empathy. Excuse me. I think that's going to be really powerful to give a voice to everyone. And so whether it's student or staff, I am really trying to think very carefully about when do we want the synchronous versus when do we want the asynchronous. So this was actually me working with a group of teachers in South America. They were amazing. This was so fun to do over the summer. And I loved that we had these opportunities to talk synchronously. But even with these adults, I had some that just would not speak up as much. And sometimes it was a language issue, because sometimes I had those who were not first language, their first language was not English. And so obviously they're in South America, so it might not be. But they were able to have their voice shared when we used something like a discussion board in an LMS or a Flipgrid or something like that. So that ability to have that asynchronous sharing of practices is very important always. And I think we're really high on the learning curve right now, so we really need that opportunity. And again, even if it's just a Google Classroom with a question that says what's going on, maybe it's something that happens regularly, or maybe it's just an ongoing conversation, maybe both. But I think it's really important to give those spaces for both the synchronous and the asynchronous. And then of course, how can we just even productivity sharing? So maybe there's a Google Drive that's got things for all the different teams, all the different grade levels. So I know I said this earlier, but it isn't about the tools, it's about the relationships that the tools enable. And so it isn't about Zoom, it's about being able to connect with all of you, regardless of the fact that I'm at home and you're maybe in your office with no one else in the building, or maybe you're at home as well. So it's just that we have this ability to connect. And yeah, Zoom is what gets us there, but this isn't about Zoom. And so here's a restorative practice that I like to do at the end of sessions, and I'll do something similar to this at the end of this. But in person, we would get into a circle. A lot of SEL practices are in a circle, but we aren't in the same room, but we can still do this by going around the Zoom room and connecting. So I started the session feeling and I'm feeling now. So how have you stayed connected with your team? Feel free to do some 5-2-5 breathing if you're not ready to respond to this. Up to you. I understand that. Yeah. So it sounds like some of you have the regular structure of we're going to check in on this set day or the set time, and I think that's really helpful. It was funny. I heard another theme this morning with the kids that they like structure and they liked that consistency, and that gave them some comfort and some sense of normalcy. And I don't think that's like as in replicating the school day as we would traditionally do it and trying to replicate that online, but I think just knowing what's coming, because there's so much uncertainty now. So I think that you all having regularly scheduled meetings with teams can be really helpful. And then again, I encourage you to think about that asynchronous and the synchronous. How can we have both to truly balance out? Because I know the synchronous can be really hard schedule-wise, have a lot of value. So when we can't do that as much as we would like, how could we do the asynchronous? And then this is another tip that I would strongly recommend, and that is be generous with your presence. And earlier I mentioned that in the world of online learning, relentless is a big, big word. And so I feel like as leaders, we have to be as relentless with our staff as we expect them to be with their students. And so being really generous with our presence, and not just in a big staff meeting, although those are very helpful, but things like a school hashtag. And so kind of showing your presence not only to your staff, but also to the community and to learners, I think can be really helpful. So I'm a huge fan of school hashtags. And this is actually my kids' neighborhood school. And so their principal, Julie Jennings, she tweets constantly. And this is her way of having presence, because she wants not only her teachers and her students to know that she's making it into classrooms as much as she can in a physically distant school, but if they're in there for hybrid learning, she is going and taking pictures, and she is documenting, and she is sharing. And this is her way of not only her own presence, but having presence in the community for what the teachers are doing, what the students are doing. So I love this. They actually have 2 hashtags, the Be Awesome The school is Haas, so Hawesome, haha. Be Hawesome and then Haas Nation are the two that they use the most. And so I love that. This was something from back in the spring, like literally March. And this was a school in New Orleans, and they reached out to their community and we go, we know you're learning at home, take some pictures of learning at home and send it to us. And then they put them all over their Instagram. And so I thought that was really a really cool way to do that too. And so I have advocated for considering parents and families as peers for many, many years. And we wrote about it in the book. And I think that this is a really unique opportunity to leverage the situation that we're in, even though we didn't choose it. But now we have this homeschool connection that has to be as strong, actually stronger than ever. And so what are the ways we can do it? I will say, I know that a lot of people have been doing the family interest surveys. That's great. I will say, if you do not follow up with how you use the data, they will not want to do it again. And so we have to be really transparent about, if we're asking them for their opinions, we need to be transparent with how we're taking those opinions and utilizing them. And sometimes parents are like, well, I said this in the survey. Well, they're one person, and that might not actually be how the majority of people responded. So it might not be that we're not listening. It's that they were the minority, and that is not something that we are able to offer right now, but maybe it is also something we can offer down the road. So really trying to think about those ways that we can draw them in, because they are obviously very important stakeholders pre-COVID. And now when we're coming into their homes in a way that is very, in a lot of their, in some people's perspective, very intrusive. And so we've got to have this two-way communication. How can we really be as successful as possible? And we want to share the successes. That's what's going well. And that's why I loved this. Like, this is what's working. And if it's not working in your home, let's talk. And how can we make sure that this is working for you better than it is? So I think that's really important. I loved hearing from kids this morning. And so I'm always trying to learn from kids, and I am going to wrap up here in just a minute, but I have some slides at the end that are just more takeaway for you to kind of, if you want to explore Twitter and you're not already on there. But I love this project, Inspire Ed, and this is from Yale Center for Emotional Intelligence. And this is a student run with the support of adults, but it's for middle and high school students, and they are running an SEL program at their school. And so I love it. It's a really great free resource. I'm encouraging you to check that out. And even if you're not middle and high school, I think they have some resources that are real gems for all of K-12. And then, see, I had it linked. I didn't even realize that. All right. So how have you been generous with your presence? I'm going to give you a second to respond to that. And then I'm going to get to our last tip. And then I'm going to go ahead and close this out. Like I said, I have some slides in here that are really more about a takeaway. And I'm going to try and stick to that original timing, though, and we lost a few minutes with the transition. So getting to one of my favorites. And so I think what teachers and administrators did in the spring was miraculous. To pull this all off in such a short turnaround was truly amazing, truly inspiring. And given the constraints, one of the things that I saw happening probably the least was the peer-to-peer. For adults and for kids, right? And so a lot of times maybe the teacher was connecting with the whole group, or the teacher was connecting with individuals, but they were rarely connecting with each other. And same thing for teachers. It was really sometimes a struggle for them to connect with their peers. So here's just the research, Joyce and Showers. You've probably seen this before. Well, what do we know? Until there's practice in coaching and mentoring, it doesn't matter how much they understand the theory, it's not going to make a difference. So we really have to get each other learning together. And this was something that I've been saying for a very long time. I think the best teacher learning comes from seeing each other in practice. And so how can we get in and see each other? And so back to pineapple charts, which has been around for a while, but this is something we can do now where we can sign up and zoom in to another teacher's class and see what's happening. And I think that's really, really helpful. And so I want to encourage you, if you haven't already, check out the concept of principal PLCs. For those of you that are in leadership positions, this can feel extra isolating because there's only one of you at a site potentially. And so how can you connect with your peers to make those connections as well? And so looking ahead, I think that these are the slides. I'm just going to go ahead and talk about how I want you to be able to build your learning connections with the world, not just with your immediate district or school. And so I just have some slides in here about how you can search Twitter. I hope you want to check that out, because if you're not already on Twitter, that is super helpful. And Instagram's helpful too. And Facebook has a lot of great groups. There's not one way to do it, like we talked about, but there are some good ingredients. So I do see this as our opportunity to rethink school structures and redefine roles. Very excited about that. I am sad about the tragedy, but I do think we'll come out better on the other side of this. And so I'm looking at this as an opportunity. I hope you are too. And I did create this website, bit.ly/fall in love with teaching again, because I know some of our teachers are struggling, but I coach a lot of teachers and I give them resources on building community, setting the stage, and creating engaging lessons. And so I have this free resource. It's in the slides. It's linked here, and you can check it out. And hopefully you find that helpful, and maybe just helpful to share with your team. So I am going to start to wrap up, and I can stay on for a little bit if anyone wants to ask some specific questions, anything they didn't get a chance to share in the chat. But what I would love is our optimistic closure. If you would do me a huge favor and reflect on the things that we've shared and discussed in here, what is 1 or 2 words that sum up your feelings about our session today? Thanks for joining, Jason. Absolutely. I agree. I agree, Stephanie. Thank you. And again, I echo what our students shared this morning, and that what's bringing them to school a lot, absolutely, Jason. What's bringing our kids to school a lot is those connections, that they want to be connected to their teacher, that they want to be connected to their friends. So let me go ahead, and I'm going to make sure this is hyperlinked. And then I just want to wrap up, and I know we're out of time, but I want to wrap up with some additional resources. So Jason, and I'm actually going to put the whole slide deck in again, because that was shared at the beginning, and I know sometimes people pop in and out of these through internet or other things. So thank you for sharing your time with me. The last thing I wanted to share with you, some additional free resources. We've got the evolvinglearner.org website. We've got Lemonade Learning podcast. Our first guest was Katie Novak. We've also had Tom Murray and Jimmy Casas and a bunch of other really great thought leaders. Katie Martin was our season closer. We'll relaunch pretty soon, but we've got 22 episodes right now for some on-demand professional learning for you and your teachers. And for teachers, we've got some really great episodes from Raina Friedman and Rochelle Pope, Danae Pope, and we've got just some awesome, awesome teachers. Catelyn Tucker's on there as well. So lots of great, great people. And I'll stick around for a Q&A for a few minutes, because I'm going to leave this open for my next session. Please do the eval. And if anyone likes stickers, maybe it'll be something to give to your staff, let me know. Put a little sticker request in. So sorry, I tried to keep us on track, Jason, but I'm happy to stay on if anyone has any questions.